You're listening to Geek Therapy Radio.
Welcome back to Geek Therapy Radio. As a reminder, this entire show is being recorded to cassette tape. So what you're listening to right now is off of an old school cassette tape. And if I hadn't mentioned anything, would you have even noticed? That's right, cassette tapes are better than you don't remember them being. Anyways, if you bought... Did I say I'm Johnny Hamburger? That's who I am. Johnny Hamburger, welcome back to Geek Therapy Radio. For some reason, do you ever feel like your brain is just in a cloud? That's my brain tonight. But I'm like, you know what? I'm going to muscle through it, try to put together a coherent show for you. And I knew I would, more or less, because I love doing this. This is so fun to me. Again, part of the geeky reason I wanted to have a radio show is so I could play with radio equipment and put electromagnetic beams out into the universe. That's a very romantic thing, and I don't know how long terrestrial radio is going to be around. So while it's here, at this stage of my career, these are the glory days of having my radio show. Anyways, if you bought an iPhone X or an iPhone 10, I was going to say I'm sorry. I'm not really sorry. If you like it, that's great. There are some cool things about it. There's lots of controversial things about it. But what I'm getting onto right now is when they first announced that the phone was going to be almost entirely glass, I rolled my eyes because I knew that just meant, even if it's Gorilla Glass, I knew that it's going to be very, very brittle. Now, the reason why they made it glass and ceramic isn't really a mystery. It's because it's for better radio transmission of radio signals. For instance, the cellular signal that you're using to make calls, Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, all of that high bandwidth information, all those high bandwidth radio waves travels much, much better through glass than it does through metal. So, in the past with... I'll use my Galaxy Note 4 here, for example. The antennas on this thing, like the Wi-Fi antenna and whatnot, they travel along the edge of this. And as a matter of fact, the back of the Note 4 is this plastic. So radio waves travel really easy through plastic. But even so, they've got the antenna kind of running around one of the outside corners, edges of the phone, to put it as close to the edge as possible so it's not buried or too close to metal. So this is what iPhones have done. Do you remember the iPhone 4, I believe, when the 4 came out? It was having all sorts of connection issues with cell towers and with Wi-Fi and all that because they had put the antenna behind the metal side of the case, and basically it was having a tough time picking up or transmitting signals out of it because it was too close to the metal. So the iPhone X, the iPhone 10 is mostly glass and porcelain for the signals to travel through the glass much easier than metal. Here's a better example. If you're driving around listening to the radio, and I'll even say Sirius radio, is something different happening with a satellite radio, but I'll explain both phenomenon. Let's say you're listening to KPRC 950. Right now you're listening to KPRC 950 and you're listening to Geek Therapy Radio. Let's say you drive under an underpass. The radio show disappears, or it gets very staticky and you can't hear it. Because basically when you're under an overpass, all the metal iron bars going through the concrete, the rebar that's going through the concrete, creates a Faraday cage. A Faraday cage is an apparatus for where you're inside the cage. No radio frequencies can enter or exit the Faraday cage because the wires in the cage absorb and deflect the radio waves. So that's what happens when you drive under an overpass when you're listening to the radio. For instance, KPRC 950 AM, or you're listening to The Buzz, or you're listening to Sunny, or The Beat, or whatever you're listening to with your car's antenna. The signal goes away when you go under an overpass, or it gets very distorted or very quiet or very staticky. What happens with satellite radio when you go under an antenna, or when you go under a bridge, is that the satellite receiver obviously is getting cut off from the satellite. If you don't have a line of sight to the satellite, your satellite radio won't work. So if you go under dense trees, you lose the satellite signal. If you drive through a tunnel, of course you're losing the satellite signal. So that's what's going on with satellite radio. So back to the iPhone X being made of all glass. It is not doing well in drop tests at all. One drop from even 3 feet in the case, you get spider webs and cracking through the case. Not through the case, through the shell of the body. Hopefully you have a protective case on it. That's all I'm getting at with this, is if you have an iPhone 10, you've already spent $1,000 on it, or more than that, get a freaking case for it. What is it, like $1,100? It's the most expensive phone ever. It's over $1,000. So spend $20 on a case for it. Drops from 6 feet rendered many services of the phone, rendered many sensors inoperable. Complete damage. So let's say you swipe it off your desk with any sort of velocity, your phone's broken. In many cases, the touchscreen stops working altogether. Face recognition, those cameras stop working from relatively short drop tests. Like I don't want to do my Note 4 right now because there is no case on it. I'm sure if I dropped it off my desk here, which is about 4 feet, it would be okay. Matter of fact, you know what? I'm just going to do it. I've got, for the YouTube people watching, look, I've got my stopwatch going, 6 minutes, 45 seconds. I'm going to drop it. I'm not going to drop it on its edge. I'm going to drop it off my desk here about 4 feet, kind of at an angle, see what happens. I did not like doing that. But all it did was apparently close my stopwatch. So let's see if I can bring that back up. Yep, still going. So my Galaxy Note 4 just fell off my desk and was fine. A iPhone 10, from all the tests they've done, a 4-foot drop like that would have broken something. So all of my concerns with the phone being completely glass and completely ceramic are confirmed by many independent testers and agencies that the iPhone X is the most fragile iPhone that they've ever released. Probably one of the most fragile phones. It is a far cry from the Nokia 3310 or whatever that I still have. Basically, you can use a Nokia like a sledgehammer and it won't break. They're indestructible. Don't actually test that, but they are very robust. 3320, or maybe it's a 3310. I'm probably right. Anyways, I'm probably right. Here's the big news. We just talked about the iPhone for a little bit. Here is some actual awesome news that I am really, really stoked about. Because not only is the technology behind it really awesome to get stoked about, but the merger of these two companies, which I'm going to tell you in a second, is super exciting to get stoked about. Intel will begin to ship processors with embedded AMD graphics and memory. So the processors, the mobile processors we use right now have built-in graphics. You're using if it's an Intel chip, which it probably is, it's Intel like 615 or 620, whatever it's called, whatever the built-in graphics to the CPU is. That's what we're using right now. But these new chips will have basically dedicated graphics on the same chip with the CPU, and it's Intel and AMD releasing these chips. It's Intel and AMD working together. Intel and AMD are rivals. They both make different CPUs. They are rivals with each other. But Intel is working with AMD's graphical department to integrate AMD Radeon chips, AMD Radeon GPUs onto Intel CPUs, onto 8th generation H series processors. The 8th generation mobile processors, the U processors, are quad core 4-thread. So if you're buying, an i7, like an i7, a U series i7 8th generation processor is now 4 cores, 8 threads, whereas in the past the U series 7th generation and below have been dual core hyper-threaded, so 2 cores and 4 threads, but now 8th generation 4 cores, 8 threads, which is great. They're 15 watt CPUs, they're 15 watt packages, but quad core, they boost up to 4 gigahertz, they idle around like 1.8 gigahertz. So that's already from the 7th generation to 8th generation. That is a huge performance boost. Usually generational increases are incremental. There's 3% here, 4% here, but this time it's like 30%, 40% better than the previous generation in benchmarks and in real world use. So the fact that the new 8th generation H series chips are going to have an embedded AMD Radeon GPU and memory, HBM memory, high bandwidth memory, that's a big thing too. Usually, AMD used to integrate their own GPUs onto their chips. Their AMD CPUs used to have integrated GPUs with them as well, but they didn't have their own memory on the chip. So part of what, led to better gaming was that if you had faster RAM in your computer, because the RAM is what AMD integrated chips were using. This now, the new H series chips from Intel, the memory's on the chip. We don't know exactly how much it's going to be. I'm guessing it's going to be at least 2 gigs of HBM memory. Come on, let's be real. At least 2 gigs. Even if it was 1 gig, that'd be all right. I take that back. 1 gig would not be all right in 2017. It's going to be at least 2 gigs, probably 4 gigs of built-in memory onto the CPU chip. That's going to be amazing. That means that the AMD Radeon inside the Intel CPU inside the package is not going to have to rely on the system RAM. So that's awesome. That's really that's amazing. And not only for the fact that it's Intel and AMD teaming up to make one product. 2 rivals teaming up to make one product. That's awesome. I am super, super stoked. And again, we don't know that the exact specifications of clock speed. I'm talking about the integrated GPU. We don't know the exact specifications on clock speed. We don't know exact specifications on how much memory it's going to contain. But my guess, at least 2 gigahertz. And my guess, at least 900 megahertz on the core clock. Maybe higher. I don't know. Going to be over 800. That's just my guess. It's also a 45 watt chip, just like the U series chips right now. Actually, no. U series are 15 watt. These new chips are going to draw up to 45 watts or lower. They could keep it around 15 watts. Although I would imagine if they made an H series, 8th generation H series CPU with the built-in Radeon graphics and kept it at 15 watts, you're probably going to sacrifice a couple cores. So let's say you buy an i7 with the integrated Radeon graphics. It's probably not going to be a quad-core hyper-threaded CPU in the chip. It's probably going to be dual-core hyper-threaded, which is still going to be great. It's not going to be super high-end for gaming, but you're going to be able to game. That's the point. You're going to have these thin and sexy mobile devices that are capable of gaming, capable of good video editing. It's going to be amazing. I am super stoked for that. I'm Johnny Hamburger. We'll be right back with more Geek Therapy Radio during the break. Flip out your celery phone, not if you're driving, but go follow Geek Therapy Radio on Instagram, go like Geek Therapy Radio on Facebook, and go subscribe to Geek Therapy Radio on YouTube to see all sorts of cool things. I just dropped it on the floor, but the cassette tape I'm using to record this show, if you haven't seen a cassette in a while, and I just did a drop test on my old Galaxy Note 4, so go to YouTube to see those things. But other than that, stick around. One more segment coming up. I'm having more fun with the show than I thought. We're getting nitty gritty nerdy with this stuff. I'm talking about specs and specifications for things. Very nerdy. Stick around, more Geek Therapy Radio coming up. I'm Johnny Hamburger. See you in a couple of minutes.